Beliefs about vampires, werewolves, witches, and wizards are widespread.
Exactly what is a serial killer?
Our house was 2 rooms, and there was 7 of us.
He held the bat like this.
That's why I have characters who sort of expose themselves.
And everybody always said, Coach Carter, Samuel Jackson is taller than you. I said, I know, but I think I'm better looking.
So what I'm going to be doing today is just giving a little overview of the fun part of linguistics. A lot of people are afraid about what linguistics is because they think there's a lot of like numbers and math and all that, and that is fun too. But what I'm going to be talking today, I hope that it challenges your views that you have about language in general and languages in particular. We'll talk about what is linguistics, the difference between language and languages, what linguists study, what we don't study. And then I'm going to go over some of the languages of Louisiana because I think that it is super interesting that you live here and there's so much history, linguistic history in Louisiana that I've tried to learn as much as I can so I can transmit that to you. So language is something very specific to humans, and I know that all of you are going to be starting thinking about ChatGPT and what ChatGPT can do with language. What humans and ChatGPT are very different. Both generate language, but we generate language in a very different way. And the way we speak can tell a lot about how we're processing things in our mind. We use language all the time for everything. Just think about how many times you've used language today and what have you accomplished by using language. So language permeates the human experience, so it's easy to see into the human mind. We're kind of like private investigators, and when you're speaking, we're like, okay, I know more now that you're speaking. So linguistics is the systematic or scientific study of language. We have language like somebody would have, I don't know, a horse, and we're going to study horses, so we study language. We just get data, and we study different aspects of language. One of the questions I get when somebody says, so what do you do? And I say, I'm a linguist. What do you think the question is? How many languages do you speak? And that's like asking a veterinarian, how many animals do you have? Do you think that veterinarians are animal hoarders? Maybe. Maybe linguists are also language hoarders, but that's not what we do. It's just that we like languages so much that we want to learn more languages. Same thing as a veterinarian. They love animals so much that they want to have several, but what they do is not having animals. They study animals, they cure animals. Also a geographer, if you ask a geographer, how many countries have you visited? Probably a lot, but that's not his job, right? Is this a word? I get that a lot. I'm not a dictionary. My brother is in mathematics, and he's not a calculator. So I could say, hey, how much is 235 times 27? Maybe he knows, because he's a mathematician. Maybe I know if something is a word or not, but that's not my job. That's the job of a dictionary. And are you analyzing the way I speak? Yes. So then what do? We study oral language as it occurs in everyday life. We don't really study written language because written language is not natural, but oral language is. There's 7,000 languages in the world, and a lot of them are not written, but nobody could say that those are not languages. So we study how we speak, how we process language, and writing is something more artificial that sometimes we study, but it's not the main thing we study. And also, we study how people really speak, not how they should speak. So don't come to a linguist and ask about correctness, because everything is correct. If it came out of your mouth and you're a native speaker of the language and people understand what you're saying, that's a check, okay? So I'm going to talk about 2 prescriptive rules of English, those kind of rules that you get in class. I hope there was an English teacher over there. So 2 rules that are given to you that from the linguistic point of view have no sense. For example, have you heard that you cannot split infinitives? Can you? Yes, you can. This rule comes from Latin because in Latin or in Spanish, for example, verbs are one word. So we have amare is to love, and it's just one word, but to love is two words. Same thing, navigare, to sail. So you see here that in Latin and in English, in Latin you have one word. Can you divide one word? Can you put a word inside another word? Usually you don't. But if you have two words, why can't you? So we do split infinitives in English. Example, I expect our output to more than double in a year. How can you say that without splitting the infinitive? Are you going to be quiet today? Okay. You could say, I expect our output not only to double, but more than that. That sounds a little weird, right? So we have instances in which actually splitting an infinitive and putting something in between the two and the rest of the verb is actually something we can and we should do. You know who this guy is? Are you too young to know who this guy is? Okay, have you heard that double negatives are wrong? Yeah. They are not. In Spanish, we say no tengo nada. No is a negative, nada is a negative. In French, we have je ne sais pas rien, and ne and pas are both negative particles. In Italian, we have non ho visto niente, and non and niente are negatives. And in English, we have I do not have anything. And not and any are actually two negatives. Or even a better example, this rule doesn't make any sense. We have two negatives. So it's not true that we cannot use double negatives. Now, have you heard that two negatives make a positive? Okay, sometimes they do. I cannot go to the party means that I have to go to the party. You cannot love puppies means that you have to love puppies. But not always, and this is where Mick Jagger from the Rolling Stones comes into play. He said, I can get no satisfaction, and that doesn't mean what you think it means. Okay. Here I have a joke, because in linguistics we have to make a lot of jokes because language, jokes, is the same thing. It says, a linguistics professor was lecturing to his English class one day. In English, he said, a double negative forms a positive. In some languages, such as Russian, a double negative is still a negative. However, there is no language wherein a double positive can form a negative. And a student said, yeah, right. So there you have two positives that make a negative. Okay, so now if we go into the wonderful world of linguistics, we have a lot of different layers of study that we do in linguistics, and we start from the smallest units, which are sounds, individual sounds, in phonetics and phonology. Then we go into morphology, which is the parts of the words. Then we go into syntax, which is the order in which we put the words. Semantics has to do with the meaning of the words, and then pragmatics has to do with everything else when you have a relationship with somebody and how you want to express something, how you express it, whether the other person understands, etc. And there's some other applied linguistics fields that use all this, see, speech, sounds, phonemes, meaning, etc., to do something else, like, for example, teaching. Applied linguistics, teaching is part of applied linguistics, and we use knowledge in all of that so we can transmit that knowledge to the language student. So I'm going to give you some examples of some of those subfields of linguistics. So the first one is phonetics and phonology. It has to do with sounds. So I'm going to ask you to think of this sound in these three words. Please mouth them in your mind or in your mouth. And tell me, are those T's the same? Or do they sound a little different? I see some heads going like this, like they sound different. How do they sound different? But are they really different? It's just a T. Okay, so in atomic, we have a T. In atom, we have a R. And in storm, we have a T. So those are three different sounds. But in our brain, they're just T's, right? So that's something important that we take into account. How your brain thinks that 3 different sounds is one sound. Or you see a T and suddenly your brain knows if it's going to sound like ta or r. Atomic and atom, like those sounds are very, very different. Now, I want you to think about the initial sounds of thin and sin. Are those different? Oh yeah, that's easier. Why is it easier to realize that these 2 sounds are different and those are not? Because I can tell you that the difference between f and s, linguistically, acoustically, is less than the difference between atom and atomic. Pardon, atomic and atom. It's because they can change the meaning of a word. Okay, if we have those 3 sounds at the beginning, there's no word in English where saying one or the other will change the meaning of the word. But there, as you can see in thin and sin, they do change the meaning of the word. So that's what we study in phonetics and phonology. In phonetics, we'll just describe the sounds and say how those sounds are produced. And in phonology, we study whether it's really important to know whether sounds are different or we just trust our brain and whatever comes out is okay.
Das hier ist mein Sektor. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das Gerät und das Gerät. Überlebensradar.
Mayday, Mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
So in this commercial, we can see that th and s are really important in English, but maybe they are not that important in German. So that's what we study about accents. You know, Sofia Vergara, how she pretends to have a heavier accent that she has. Why do we have foreign accents? It's really because our brains process sounds in a different way. So you have, I guess, a lot of you are native speakers of English. So you have the difference, for example, between E and E, very clear in your brain. I'm a Spanish speaker. For me, they sound completely the same. So then when I say, oh, this is a sheet of paper, I could say, this is a, right? So all those confusions because of accent have to do with the phonology that we have in our brains and how important making sounds different is for us. Is there such a thing as not having an accent? Have you ever said, I don't have an accent? Raise your hand. Well, you do. You'll do. Everybody has an accent. You could say, I have an American accent in English. I have a Louisiana accent. I have a Southwestern accent. Everybody has an accent because not having an accent is not possible. It's just not possible. It's just that accent has become a word that means different. And nobody wants to be different. Nobody wants to have a foreign accent. Nobody wants to have an accent that doesn't belong here. So that's how we're using the word accent. But everybody has an accent, especially me. OK. Why is it so important not to have an accent? Because we want to fit in, right? But we all have an accent. OK, morphology is the study of how words are formed together. So I'm just going to give you a couple of morphological jokes. And I can tell you they're really bad jokes. But still. What does the termite say when it goes into a bar? Is the bartender here? Morphological joke. How do you make a cat drink? You put it in a blender. I told you they were not good jokes. But they do exemplify what morphology is, how we analyze different words. So I have put here the languages that are taught in the department here, plus languages of Louisiana, in order of morphological complexity. So for example, I don't know if there's any study of Mandarin here, or have you studied Mandarin, Chinese Mandarin? Chinese is a language that is very interesting because it doesn't have a lot of morphology. Plural and singular is the same. It doesn't add an S like we do in English or in French. And it's a language that has a very strict order because it doesn't have a lot of ways to know if you're speaking about one, if you're speaking about the past, if you're speaking about the present. So the order in Chinese is very, very strict. Then you can go into Cajun French and Louisiana Creole. Because of the way those languages have evolved, they don't have a lot of morphology either, which happens when you have languages in contact. English doesn't have a lot of morphology. How many, in a regular verb, how many times do you have to change the verb in present, depending on who the subject is? One. In Spanish or French, as many as you have. In German, yeah, you have to say all those different endings. So English is not a very complex language morphologically, and that's why the order is so important. You have to have a subject. In other languages, you can just drop the subject because the verb will tell you who the subject is. Then we have Spanish, French, and Italian, which would be more in the middle part where we have some morphology, so we can also put the subject before the verb, and nothing happens. And then German. German has some morphology, huh? You have to study a lot of word endings. Well, if you go to Latin, it's even more rich morphologically. And then you have two indigenous languages of Louisiana, and Choctaw and Caddo. I have no idea. But those are the richest languages morphologically in Louisiana. Because in one word, you can have so much information that in English you would need maybe a whole sentence, okay? Yeah, what I was saying, for example, Louisiana Creole uses a series of particles that indicate tense, aspect, mood, and all those are typical things from the West African languages that had an influence in Louisiana Creole. And for example, if you want to make a word plural, you just repeat it. So instead of say chairs, I would say chair, chair. And that means that it's more than one chair. Latin, Japanese, Choctaw, and Caddo are also heavily inflected. One verb can have 100 forms. Who wants to take classes in that language, huh? And this is why you see Chinese is a language that doesn't have a lot of morphology, but Japanese has a lot of morphology, and that's why Chinese cannot be used to type Japanese, because they just, morphologically, they are in a very different part of the spectrum. Okay, so now let's do an exercise. I have two examples here. The first one is, where do you want to go? Would you say this sentence is grammatical? Would native speakers say this? You are the native speakers. I've Googled it, so I know the answer. Is it grammatical or not? You're not very sure. I think you need to take Introduction to Linguistics. Yes, I did a search on Google, and I got 65 million hits. So that's pretty good. What about, who do you want to go with you? Is that sentence grammatical? Yeah? No? Some people are overthinking. Yes, it is grammatical. We have 4 million hits. Who do you want to go with you? That's a very complex sentence, but it's grammatical. Now, my question is, for 1A, can we say wanna en lugar de want to? Can I contract one? Okay. So where do you want to go? Okay, 400,000. Maybe because in Google people write and don't speak, they prefer to write want to instead of wanna. But still, I think that if 400,000 people type that on whatever, their blog, we can consider that's okay. Now, who do you want to go with you? Can we say wanna there? Yeah. Some of you who are saying yes, you're actually thinking of who do you want to go with. But it's a different meaning. Who do you want to go with you? Somebody's going with you. Who do you want to go with? You are going with somebody. So can you say, who do you want to go with you? No. Two people who were probably on something put that twice. The whole internet, twice. And who do you want to go with? With a different meaning from 2B, 57,000. So syntax would tell you why you cannot say to be. So let's look at this. Where do you want to go is really, you want to go where? So we see there that want to is together. And if it's together, you can say wanna. Now, 2A, who do you want to go with you? The real sentence there is, you want who to go with you? And you see here that want and to are separated. And this separation is what makes wanna ungrammatical. It's because there's something there. Even if you ask the question, there's still something there. And we're going to be calling that a trace. In Spanish, we call it a huella, because it's not there, but you cannot put those two words together because something is there still. And the last sentence, you want to go with whom? And again, want to can be together because there's nothing inside. So this is what we study in linguistics. Now, ambiguity. Let's talk about, he gave her cat food. How many interpretations do we have? One in which we give food to a cat, and another one in which somebody's eating cat food. He gave her fast food. How many interpretations? Just one. So why one has two interpretations and two only has one? More examples. The chicken is ready to eat. How many interpretations? Two. One in which the chickens are about to eat French fries, and the other one in which the alien or the android is eating his chicken burger. Okay? The chicken is ready to run. Is it also ambiguous? No, there's only one possibility. So why is it that 3 has 2 possibilities and 4 only has 1? The cake is ready to eat. How many interpretations? Just one. Unless you have a cake that likes eating something else. Washing machines can be dangerous. How many interpretations? One in which a washing machine can kill you, especially during the centrifugate. And another one in which you washing a machine can be dangerous. So with syntax, we would use the little syntactic tree and explain why those sentences are ambiguous. The last one, Toby saw a penguin with a telescope. How many interpretations? 2. One in which Toby has the telescope and sees the penguin with the telescope, and another one in which the penguin has the telescope and you see it right there, just being curious. Okay, pragmatics is about the context. And there's a lot of pragmatic jokes. Those are way more funny than the morphological ones. And pragmatics studies what we mean. Sometimes I have something to say. Then the way I say it, which might not be exactly the way I'm thinking it, and what the other person understands from what I said. So those are 3 completely different levels. How many times do you have misunderstandings? Because, oh, that's not what I meant. Oh, that's what I understood, right? So we do that all the time, and we linguists study that, especially in the court. Like sometimes we're called to the court to testify as an expert about whether somebody was threatening somebody, whether it was just an invitation. You know, sometimes we'll have some examples later. So we study the context, pre-existing knowledge that the speaker and the listener share, and the intent of the speaker. So here you have a joke, pretty bad too, that says, if I have 12 tomatoes and take away 2, what is the difference? And Jaimito says, exactly, I don't like tomatoes either. And then she says, the detention guy says, what are you in for this time? It said semantics, but it's wrong. It's pragmatics. So the examples for forensic linguistics that use a lot of pragmatics, for example, there was a bomb threat at some point, and a speaker was calling, and he was trying to pretend that he was from a place he was not, but a linguist knew better. And they were like, oh, there's things here that tell me who you're from. So the person was actually from Eastern New England and not from New York City. So he's pretending being from New York was good for the police, but was not good for the forensic linguist. Here we have a ransom note that says, do you ever want to see your precious little girl again? Put 10,000 cash in a diaper bag. Put it in the green trash can. See how they spell can? Trash can on the Devil Strip at corner of 18th and Carlson. Don't bring anybody along. No cops. Come along. I'll be watching you all the time. Anyone with you, deal is off, and daughter is dead. So the person was pretending to be illiterate because they can spell things like watching, Carlson, right? But they cannot spell can. So the writing was pretending to be illiterate, but actually he was from Akron, Ohio, because apparently Devil Strip is only used in Akron, Ohio. So this person was caught very fast, even though they were trying to mislead the police. Also, a question intended to be interpreted as a request. So for example, does the trunk open? If the police says that to you, what do? You open the trunk? If you're literal, what would you do? Yeah. Yes, it does open. And end of story. I had a friend who was picking me up from the airport 2 days ago. And she texted me, do you drive? And I said, yeah, sometimes if my wife is with me, she will drive. Well, we get out of the airport, and then she leaves her driver's seat. And she was expecting me to drive, and I'm like, what? And she's like, no, I told you. And I'm like, no, you asked me if I drive. You didn't ask me if I want to drive. So you see there the difference between pragmatics, what she wanted, and how I understood it. So here, the Supreme Court found that the suspect gave consent because he was not asked to open the trunk, which is illegal. Just so you know, if the police comes and they want to see what's in your trunk, they cannot do that. Okay? So if they say, does the trunk open? You say, yes, but you don't open it. They have to have an order to open it. And finally, a warning that could be interpreted as a threat. Don't play with the pan or you will get burned. Is that a threat? Or is a warning? What about this? This was for Ronald Reagan. Ronnie, listen, chump, resign or you'll get your brains blown out. Is that a threat or a warning? The court said that it was a threat, but it was also the precedent. I don't know if it happened to you, you will get the same results. Okay, and finally, social linguistics. Do different genders speak differently? Do you think in your experiences that the genders speak differently? Usually know that women tend to be more conservative because of the way, it's not because of physical gender, it's because of the way we grow in community, and women for the most part are asked to be a little bit more, and men can do whatever they want, right? So with language, it's kind of the same. Men tend to be more innovative with language, and women tend to be more conservative. And there's not enough research on non-binary people, but there will be, and if you become linguists, you can go that route. What is the difference between a language and a dialect, and who cares? Not me, not linguists. Languages and dialects is also a word that has some connotation that your language is not good enough. For linguists, everything is a language. We don't, politicians care way more about what is a dialect and what is a language than linguists, so we don't. So dichotomies that are not really linguistic are language versus dialect, we don't care. Standard dialect versus non-standard dialect, we don't care. Official language versus non-official language, we don't care either. And language for business or school and language for the home or family, we don't care either. All of them are correct languages. Sometimes there's a place for one, there's a place for another, but all of them are valuable in their own context. These dichotomies are not linguistically or scientifically based. There's no language that is better scientifically than other, and they're usually used to oppress and to marginalize people. It's a kind of like a racist way of saying, I'm racist, but I'm gonna talk about language instead of race, so you don't call me racist, but those are very racist. ideas. Okay, I'm going to give you 4 sentences. I'm going to ask you to read them silently in your mind. And I will tell you that they're all grammatical. But they are not very easy to process. Some of you are like, no, that's not a sentence. Number 3. Can you find the meaning of this? Or you still think it's ungrammatical? Fat people eat accumulates. Different from fat people eat, and then, oh, what is this accumulates? And you go back. You understand the meaning of this sentence? It's talking about the fat people or about the fat that people eat. Okay? So in psycholinguistics, we study why some sentences take more time to process, why I see some of you like this. We study that because that means that there's something in that sentence that probably syntactically or morphologically is very complex, and we cannot see it when we just see the sentence. Okay, and neurolinguistics, we look at the brain and how the brain is organized and what each of the hemispheres do. And here we have a picture of fruits that make a face. So our left hemisphere, which is connected to our right eye, is analytical. So our left hemisphere sees the fruits. And the right hemisphere, my left eye, is the one that recognizes faces. So my right brain sees a face. So if you all see fruits and a face, that means that your hemispheres are actually communicating with each other. Because there's some people who have this part of the brain severed, so the right and the left hemispheres are not talking to each other. So what happens with them is that if they have a problem, if they go like this and they only see with one eye, they will either see the fruit or the face. But they won't see both at the same time. Isn't that fascinating? There's a documentary on YouTube with Alan Alda where they do this experiment for the first time, and I recommend that you watch it. Okay. So now, I want to spend the last 10 minutes of the talk talking about the languages of Louisiana because it's so interesting. Do any of you speak any of the languages of Louisiana in addition to English? Those are fascinating. Okay, so just so you know, there's no official language in Louisiana. Do you know that? I didn't. And obviously, a lot of people speak English. French, they put everything together, which is not very fair because there's a lot of different French in Louisiana, Spanish 3%, and Vietnamese. Apparently, there's a Vietnamese community. So here you have the indigenous languages of Louisiana, and it's a very sad picture because if you see, most of them are extinct. We have Chitimacha, Tunica, Atacapa, Natchez. I've seen a lot of things that are called Natchez. Do you know it was a language? And probably a tribe back in the day. From another family, we have Choctaw, which is still spoken, but only 10,000 people. Huma, which is pidgin-based, and then we have Caddo, which has fewer than 25 speakers. We don't think this language is going to survive a few years from now. And then, do you know that Cajun French and Louisiana Creole are actually different? I see heads that go like, yeah. Okay, Cajun French is a dialect of French, but Louisiana Creole is a separate language. It's a French-based Creole, and we're going to talk about Creoles right now. The origins of Cajun French are Canadian, but the origins of the Louisiana Creole are a mixture of French, African languages, Spanish, and Native American. Cajun French is in rural areas of Louisiana, but Louisiana Creole is more in New Orleans. Cajun French is closely related to Standard French with some vocabulary, and Louisiana Creole is much more different. And in terms of vocabulary, Cajun French has unique vocabulary, but it's still related to Standard French, and Louisiana Creole draws from multiple languages. So the Creole, Creolization is something that we also study, the linguists. And this is when you have a bunch of people who speak different languages and they need to communicate with each other. So what do? You start putting parts of the language, you start trying to teach each other your language, and you end up with a mixture, a beautiful mixture that is not very morphologically rich, as we've seen, because who needs morphemes when you're creating a new language? And that is called a pidgin. When you're speaking a language, if I speak English and you speak Spanish, and you don't speak English and I don't speak Spanish, we start creating this language, which is not Spanglish, because you need to know both languages for Spanglish. And then we kind of communicate in this very rustic language. It's not really a language. However, when we have kids, and those kids learn that language as a native speaker, they add a lot of things to the language that we're missing, because children are very good at language, and then they become Creoles. And Creoles are full-fledged languages that are spoken by native speakers. That's the difference between a pidgin and a Creole. So here you have a bunch of different Creoles. Usually they have 2 or 3 different languages. Usually it's in places where there's a lot of colonization. You see here, you know, all the slaves that were sent to America, all of them created their own language because they were not taught English, right? They didn't want them to speak the same language. So then they created their own language. And the linguistic landscape of Louisiana is very interesting. I haven't had time to go to a lot of places yet, but I like to do linguistic landscapes because that tells you what languages are active in the community. And we can see that there is French still represented in the landscape of Louisiana, right? Right as you come into Louisiana, you have a little message in French. So that's part of your heritage. I would like you, when you go out today, outside, that you look at the signs. You look at the languages they represent, which one is bigger than the other one, which one is more prominent than the other one, which one is more common. Where are we? Are we in an area where there's more French speakers, where there's more English speakers? Is this a touristy place? And the linguistic landscape is something that really helps us understand a community just by looking, not only at the landscape with the trees and the rivers, but the linguistic landscape. Okay, so despite the linguistic diversity in the world, all languages are very, very, very similar. They differ in small things. Once you study 5 languages, you realize that all languages are pretty much the same. And a linguist studies language in general. We can study just the properties of language, nouns in language. Not necessarily languages. However, as with vets and puppies, we do like to learn several languages because it's fun. Don't you think it's fun to learn languages? How a language works in the mind of the speakers or the signers. We look at how much time it takes to process language, whether there's ambiguity, whether somebody was threatening somebody or warning them, etc. And that's all I have for you.